System theory is one of the most important things to understand in terms of the framework of intelligence, the efficiency with which energy is transformed into sustainable human well-being. Because system theory is the vehicle by which intelligence has the potential of being realized. Now, system theory expresses itself in a couple of different dimensions. And mathematically speaking, what system theory reveals is statistics. So, for example, if you send 100 people to Vegas with $1,000 each and they place 100 bets, 98% of them will return penniless or with vastly diminished funds. If you take 1,000 people and they make a deposit with $1,000 on a piece of real estate, maybe a lease option or something of that nature, and give them an allotted amount of time, over time, perhaps 80% of them will have doubled their investment. So the thing to understand on the mathematical dimension of system theory is that it doesn't matter the individual, or not that much. You might get a good gambler who is able from time to time to beat the odds. But over time, and certainly on a statistical level, sending people to Vegas to place lots of bets is going to lose money. And investing in real estate in the long term is going to make money. Now, the same is true with every area and every system. Sending people fishing in the mountains where there is no water is going to yield poor results. Sending people to a well-stocked fishing pond is going to give good results. Now, within the system, within any given system, there is definitely skill and freedom and individuality. So you can be at the top of a crappy system due to skill and individuality, but still be doing poorly compared to someone who has no skill in a kind of an abundant or successful system. And this is a really important thing to understand. Because if you're born in Denmark and you're stupid and you're not very hardworking or whatever it is that's considered low ranking within the cult hierarchy, you are going to have a 400% higher quality of life on average, mathematically speaking, than the average American. And you may have a higher quality of life than the top 10% of Americans, maybe the top 5% of Americans. And the thing involved is a system, meaning every human being in the history of humankind has wanted to feel sustainably good and wanted to avoid feeling chronically bad. And one of the principal distinctions on that continuum is called the hierarchy of human needs, outlined by Abraham Maslow, adapted slightly. They begin with survival. And you see, in Denmark, there is paid maternity leave. There is unemployment benefits. You are paid to go to college. You actually get paid $1,000 a month to go to free, excellent college. There's paid health care. The work week is not terribly long compared to many American work weeks. There's job training, there's housing if necessary, support, etc., etc. The architecture is fantastic. The art is fantastic. The parks is fantastic. The level of sustainability, the quality of air and water in the environment, fantastic. So you have a terrific system. You have a system of an island, so you've got good breezes and clear winds to begin with, but then you've got windmills and a lot of sustainable energy. You've got thermals. There's a tremendous amount that differentiates the Danish system from the American system. And the philosophy, which is part of the system, is democratic, capitalistic socialism. So democratically elected leaders that are focusing on the social, on the benefit of the people within a free market. So you've got a mixture of, you've got guaranteed survival and security of survival that you don't have in America, because the safety net is such that it's not a matter of whether you will survive or not. That's a given within the Danish system. It's not a matter of whether you are secure in your survival or not. Again, that is a given within the Danish system. Healthcare, housing, food, education, that's certain. So survival and security are certain. Now, when you have survival and security at high levels within the population, trauma rates go down. With trauma rates going down, PTSD goes down. With PTSD going down, you have more relaxation. With relaxation going down, you have a calmer social network. So love and belonging is supported in Denmark by lower work hours and lower fear. Now, some of the most self-centered people in the world are people who are anxious about their survival, meaning they've been traumatized before, given the message that they may not survive, and they certainly don't feel secure about it. So their focus in a hierarchy of needs framework is on survival. Love and belonging does not come in until you have met the threshold of competently surviving and feeling secure in that survival. So the Denmark or Danish system is taking those needs out of the equation. So survival and security are covered automatically. What that means is that one's entering the system 2 steps higher than the average American. And thus focusing on love and belonging. Now, to the benefit of love and belonging, you have lower work hours, higher levels of relaxation because you're not dealing with survival, security, and the traumas relating to that. You've got more visionary focus. And for example, people on their deathbed usually focus on griefs around relationship or desires around relationship. Now, in that framework, when you're in survival and security, you are focused on, I need to make more money, maybe this would go wrong, maybe this would go wrong. Even if you have $1 million, you're just like, well, maybe someone would sue me, maybe I'd get in an auto accident, I'd lose everything. It's not enough, I need $3 million or whatever. So in this, and you've got retirement, of course, benefits, in Denmark as well. So you've really got those 2 things covered. And with lower working hours, you've got space to develop better social frameworks that in a nicer environment. So when you're surrounded by beauty beautiful architecture, beautiful art, beautiful parks, when you have bicycle lanes, so you're avoiding the trauma and spending more time together, when you can leave your babies out in the street. So there's a message of trust, there's an environment of abundance, there's a message of trustworthiness, because the Danish people have voted for these things, which tells anyone in that system that this is an empathic system. Because sociopaths don't vote for these types of things, and the Danish people have. So the message is, we're not very sociopathic. Now, the Americans have not, so the message is, we are sociopathic. If you're born in a ghetto, if you're born in a black, lower class family, we don't care about you. You do not have even guaranteed survival. You won't be shot up in a gang or by the police or put in jail. Zero. Nothing is guaranteed. Nothing is supported. So the average American is dealing with survival and security that has not been met. So they're not even dealing with love and belonging. And they have less time to deal with love and belonging. And they have a less attractive environment to deal with love and belonging. And the message is that they're surrounded by sociopaths because they were abused in childhood with parents busily trying to get back to work because they didn't have paid maternity leave. Their medical bills may or may not have been paid, which is a sociopathic message. No one's looking out for their optimal education. We don't care about our future. We don't care about you. We don't care about your future. These are sociopathic messages that trigger fight, flight, and freeze. They trigger the reptilian brain. The reptilian brain is incapable of developing love and relationship. So these are systems. And the systems produce statistically different results. If you're born into this system, you experience these things. If you're born into this system, you experience these things, statistically speaking. And this is the mathematical level of system theory. What's a little bit more interesting is if you look at the geometrical, as you look at different dimensions of things, they reveal different things. If you look at the dimension of color, for example, you see very different things than if you look at the dimension of sound. If you look at system theory through the dimension of geometry, there are a number of important things that we can learn about systems from geometry. Now, the first thing is that the whole, geometry starts with the circle, with the sphere. The sphere is the most graceful, the most paradoxical, the most intelligent shape in many, many dimensions. So geometry starts with the sphere. And the sphere is interesting because in the polarity of physicality, you have yin and yang energy. And in the dimension of the one and the many, the sphere is both. Because the sphere is one. It is a shape of oneness. It is the totality, the whole. So the sphere represents the whole, the one. But in order to get to a sphere through human consciousness, we build it up by refracting dots and lines. Now, here's the funny thing with a sphere. A sphere is an infinite number of dots. So you can make a sphere with 100 dots. You can make a sphere with 1,000,000 dots. You can make a sphere with 1,000,000,000 dots. It just depends how small is the dot and how many of them do you want to create in your mathematical model, in your geometrical model. So a sphere is one, but it is also infinite. You can also create a sphere by refracting an infinite number of lines. When crystal cutters create crystal spheres out of, hexagonal shaped natural quartz, what they do is they start chopping off these angles. they have a hexagonal shape and they chop off this one and they chop off this one and they chop off this one. And slowly the sphere emerges out of a refraction of angles. So as you cut here and cut here and cut here, you keep removing the sharpest points. And if you keep cutting away the sharpest points, or any point that you can find, what you end up with is a sphere. And you can do that with 1 billion cuts, 1 trillion cuts, 30 cuts. The sphere becomes more and more symmetrical the more different lines have been and planes have been utilized to create it in a mathematical model. So the sphere is one, but it is also infinite. The oneness, the roundness, the curve is the feminine or yin expression of the sphere. The lines and the dots are the yang or masculine expression of the sphere. And it's all one contained within the sphere. Now here's the interesting thing about the intersection of the sphere and human consciousness. We do not have infinite consciousness as human beings. If you try and remember a 300-digit number, 99% of people cannot do it. Now, if it's an easy one, like 30 trillion, and you know how many zeros, you may be able to pull it off. But if you just rattle off 30 random numbers, 99% of people cannot hold a 30-number version of reality. If you say that's reality, it's 30 numbers long. If you can, rattle it off, 6, 7, 2, 8, 9, 2, 8, 6, 3, 241, 6,022,022, and just rattle off 30 numbers, you can't do it. Particularly if you include higher than single digits, where you have 30 million, then 3, then 208,697. 30 of those, I can't remember what they are, let alone the sequence. Now, this is speaking to a bottleneck in human RAM. It's short-term, access memory. We're not doing very well with this level of consciousness. Now, if you look at the sphere, though, as let's compose a sphere with 1 trillion dots. Now, the Earth is spherical, so it'd be quite easy to create 1 trillion little dots, of a square inch each over the Earth. But even if we took a sphere this size and said, and then, something less than, maybe an atom size, and say, let's have 1 trillion atoms in this to compose this sphere. We're going to dot it, dot it, dot it. Now, what the eye sees is the one. It says that's one sphere. But it's made up of 1 trillion dots. And this is the intersection of system theory, because system theory is taking the round, the yin, the one, the wave, and it is turning it into particles in order to be viewed statistically and geometrically. Now, because we have a limited operating system in terms of language and mathematics and attention, when we refract the whole, the infinite, one, into a system, the most common number to use in human systems is 7, where, like the 7 habits of highly effective people. Now, why isn't that called the 308th habits of highly effective people? Because surely, if you study highly effective people, they do more than 308 things distinctly. So why not call it the 308 habits of highly effective people? Why not call it the 1007 habits of highly effective people? Surely highly effective people, if you analyze every movement of that they're involved with, there would be 3,000 different finger movements alone just to eat breakfast. then there was this angle, then there was this angle, then there was this angle, and you successfully ate your breakfast. Why dial back to 7? Well, this is something that most people can remember. Meaning it's been a decade or so, and I can still remember the 7 habits of highly effective people, but I would not be able to remember the 29 habits of highly effective people. I would not be able to remember the 308, the 10,001, so higher numbers than 7, human brains start to have problems with. And what that does and what that leads to on a geometric level is that the infinite distinctions of the one get refracted down to a heuristic model of reality. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you've got a heuristic model of reality that is you can't really call that a sphere. Now you're refracting the model, extracting it out of the sphere, and you can remember the 7, but it's imperfect. Anything less than the 1 is imperfect. But this is a very imperfect model. Now, it's imperfect in 2 ways. The first is it's very simple. When reality is very complex, this is a simple model. The second is it's not totally symmetrical. This line isn't the same as this line and this and this. And here we get into cult influence. Now, a cult is a system. And every culture has a cult-like element in it, a dogmatic, self-referential element that is cult-like. You cannot arrive at it from pure intelligence. Meaning, if you ask the intelligent question, which is this the most intelligent way to achieve X? The answer is always no in a cult. How are you? I'm fine. Is that the best way to see and be seen? Of course not. But it's what we do. Or what about buying new iPads rather than buying new paradigms? Is that the most intelligent things? Do we need to go from an iPad 6 to an iPad Pro more than we need an update in our own internal software? No. So why do we do it? Well, we're not intelligent. Or we're not high in intelligence. So just about everything you do, does it make sense for an obese country to eat more chocolate cake brownies and this and that and the other? No. It's not the fastest, most energy efficient way to deliver well-beings. So it's a form of stupidity. Cults are an expression of stupidity. They diverge from intelligence, which is the efficiency with which energy is transformed into human well-being. So why do we need cults? Why do we use cults when they're so stupid? And the answer comes back to this RAM capacity. We cannot face the complexity that is reality with the limitations of the human brain, number one. Number two, we don't like the terror in a traumatized culture or cult. We don't like the terror of grappling with the reality, which is that reality is far bigger than we understand. This takes us into the unknown. It puts us out of control. Traumatized people hate being out of control. We don't want to be out of control. If we just tell the truth and say, reality is so complex and I don't have a clue, I can't even get to 30. And it's a trillion point system. That by the time I got to the end of the trillion, the first parts have already changed because it's a trillion point system that's in motion, and I can't count that fast in a single lifetime. By the time I got to the end of the trillion, the whole thing has changed. And that leaves me feeling small and helpless and insignificant. I don't want to feel small and helpless and insignificant. Well, this is where the cult comes in. The cult comes in and says, I've got it. Let's take all this complexity of reality and create a version of reality. It's a bit dumb, but you can feel safe that you know something. Now, you don't know that much, but you can feel confident that you're not in the vast unknown, that you've got some certainty. So we're going to dumb reality down, and we're going to make it very repetitive. And we're going to teach people to all behave the same way, to talk the same way, to think the same way. Why? Because it's simpler, because you don't have to think, how are you? I'm fine. Who needed to think? I don't really want to know how you're doing, and I'm not doing fine. It's complete and utter nonsense. But it's predictable nonsense. It's not reality. It's a version of reality that's curated to be comfortable. Now, the simpler the system of reality, the more violent, the more uncomfortable, and the more dissonance there is in the relationship with reality. If you think of this as a car wheel, that reality is spherical, and we're going to have a spherical wheel, it's a pretty good deal. Meaning, if you've got round wheels, you are converting energy into movement with less violence than any other shape in the universe. So if you cut the circle in half and have that be your wheel, where you go along smoothly and then clunk, and go along smoothly and then clunk, you've got an incredibly violent system at war. Your body is relaxing, and then it is shaken. And you're not going to drive very fast. You're going to be very uneasy in that system and very hesitant to move forward, because your model of motion is so asymmetrical, it's cut in half. Now, this is what you do when you when you deal with extremes, black and white, good and bad, up and down, right? You cut the reality in half, and then you polarize, and then you say this is the good part of the wheel and this is the bad part of the wheel, so we're going to throw this away. But reality is the journey is a violent one. If you've got 4 wheels cut in half in your car and you're trying to drive, your engine is going to burn up in no time because it's so inefficient. And you're going to want to walk. Why? Because your legs are moving in a spherical type pattern. You see, your leg lifts up and moves up and forward. Your leg mimics a wheel when you run and when you walk. Now, a wheel is even better. A bicycle is going to go faster, etc. But your leg is moving in that direction. In just terms of the normal walking motion and leaning in, it's as if you're in a, it's as if you're simulating a sphere with 2 legs. So it's going to be a little bit more relaxing than a wheel cut in half. Now, a wheel cut into a triangular shape is going to be less violent than a wheel cut in half. A wheel cut into a hexagonal shape is going to be less violent still, particularly if it's rubber coated. A wheel in an octagon shape is going to be less violent than a wheel in a hexagon shape. As you move towards complexity and towards the sphere, you move towards grace, you move towards intelligence, you move towards efficiency. But the key thing is you're moving towards complexity. And at a certain point, your brain isn't keeping up with the complexity that's in flow. And then you feel out of control. So in highly traumatized cults, people keep the system or the model, the heuristic model of the system, dumbed down to a point where they feel in control, that they can track it. But at that level, like a 7-pointed wheel, it is a pretty bumpy ride. Now, the other thing that's interesting, when you take the whole and you refract it into a system, it's never a perfect system. There is no system that is perfect. The reason I say that is if you say that, take the totality of the whole and say, okay, it's 1 billion points. We're going to make a sphere with 1 billion points. Well, that's fine for the human eye. It's not that sophisticated, but it's still not the true one. You see, as long as you're dealing with system theory, as long as you're looking through a lens of distinction, language, and refraction, you're not in the one where you have the state of grace. So you're not there. It's not real. It's a model of reality that's moving closer and closer to real through the lens of human consciousness, which is based on language and distinction. So, what happens when you take the sphere and you create a heuristic model is parts of the actual reality are excluded from the model. So a cult system of values. Well, for example, if you take capitalism as a system, and then you say, well, it is the ultimate arbiter of value. Capitalism is it, right? Well, you say that, but what does it mean? What does it mean when no one pays a mother to stay home and raise a child well? Does it mean that because the woman isn't getting paid, that what she's doing is not valuable? Because if that's the case, it's very simple. She should put the baby in a dumpster and go back to work, making matchboxes, cutting down forests, making chemicals for the next, knocking door to door to get people to sign up to Jehovah's Witnesses, because those are money makers for the church, for the company, for her, whatever it is that she's doing. The capitalist framework is saying that that's valuable. So she should throw the child in a dumpster because she's not getting paid, because if you believe in the purity of the capitalist market, if it's valuable, someone will pay for it. So the fact that nobody's paying for it must mean the child has no value. So all the mothers should put all their children in the dumpster and work feverishly to make as much money as possible. And then the species can die out in a generation. Because it's more important to be true to the capitalist system than it is to survive as a species. Now, we're not quite that dumb. We say that capitalism is the best and this and that and the other, but we don't actually listen to it where it really matters, because we don't put our kids in dumpsters most of the time. And that points to the fact that systems don't work some of the time, that every system doesn't work some of the time, and that the simpler and the cruder the system, the less often it works. But every system has lines. Every system has boundaries. You're in or you're out. You're becoming a good capitalist or a bad capitalist. Well, highly educated capitalist women have less children because they're becoming good capitalists, right? Children are expensive, so we're not going to throw them in the dumpster. We're just not going to have them at all, which is one of the reasons we're moving towards population decline, which, since we're the dominant species in terms of impact on the planet today, and we have not learned resource management, may be a good thing for the planet. But we have this phenomena where the most educated women have fewer children later and later, which is one of the reasons we're moving towards population decline in the next projected 30 or 50 years. So every system is flawed, And what we can see from a geometric pattern is you take the sphere, that's the starting point in geometry, it's the shape of grace. And if you refract it into a triangle, 50% of reality doesn't fit within the triangle. If you refract it into this shape here, about 80% of reality is in here in some way or another. You can get to it by cross-referencing different points of distinction within the system. But what about these bits outside the system? They don't exist in consciousness. Or if they do, they're part of the shadow, part of the discard. They are the illusion of garbage. Now, garbage is an illusion because another way of saying garbage is this is energy that human beings have created into a form they lack the intelligence to do something with. That's what garbage is. Garbage is stuff that used to be part of an ecology, but we turned it into something else. And then we used it in a way that rendered it inoperable. So, for example, a broken radio. Well, I don't know how to fix it, so I'll call it garbage. Or I want another one and I don't want to take the time to sell it, so I'll call it garbage. In other words, garbage is energy in a form that people lack the intelligence to do something with. And so, in the absence of intelligence, we dig a big hole in the ground and dump lots of energy into these holes. We spend energy to take energy out into the street. And then we spend energy to transport energy to a big hole in the ground. And then we spend energy to bulldoze it into the hole in the ground or incinerate it. And we spend energy to incinerate it. And this is what we do with stuff we don't know how to do anything else with. So it's a low level of intelligence. Anything I don't know what to do with, I'll just call garbage. And eventually, because garbage is this stuff that doesn't fit into the system. Now, the more complex the system, the less garbage there is. Because, for example, there's all this garbage in here on it, looking at system theory through a geometric level. The line goes from this point to this point. Everything between the ultimate circle and this line is waste. It's outside the system. It's unconscious, it's taboo, it's not wanted, it's not understood, it's not valued, it's not recognized, it's not honored. It's disrespected, it's not seen, because it's not falling into a lens. For example, what do you do with energy that is between sight and sound, that we don't have a sense for? It doesn't exist for us. It exists on the energy continuum, but it doesn't exist for us. In terms of like electromagnetic frequencies, there's a little band that we can see things, a little band we can hear things, a little band. But what about all those bands in between? We don't see them. They're not part of our system of perception. We don't see 360 degrees multidimensionally or totally multidimensionally. We see a very, very narrow slice of reality and a very, very narrow slice of time and space through very narrow apertures of perception. Now, when human beings create models of reality that dishonor and exclude parts of reality, reality doesn't stop working. Reality continues to work, which is as an interconnected synergistic whole. The sphere, as the most graceful shape in the universe, is connected at every level, and it is a beautiful shape. It is a synergy. It functions with more grace as one than it would as random bits. And so it does function as one. And the bits that are out here reinforce the bits that are in here, and the bits that are in here reinforce the bits that are here. But the limited vision that is created by a paradigm and by a system of thinking and cult understanding doesn't connect all the dots that are actually there. Now, this creates the phenomena of rebellion, because in order to make reality look like our version of reality, we have to deny anomalous data that doesn't fit within our paradigm. We have to deny anomalous data. And we have to do something, we have to tell lies about how this simpler system is self-sustaining and self-referential, when in fact it is referencing things that don't fit within the paradigm. A good example of this is Cartesian thinking. René Descartes, a good Frenchman coming back from war, was visited by an angel. And the angel suggested a paradigm of science. She said, go forth and explore the world through measurements and numbers. This was the birth of science. And so Cartesian logic went through with the paradigm of numbers and measurements. Now, one of the interesting fallouts of Cartesian thinking is that anything that has no number and cannot be measured, you can't see it, you can't hear it, that's a measurement. To see it is to measure it with eyes. To hear it is to measure it with ears. To touch it is to measure it with hands and stuff. If it cannot be measured, it doesn't exist. Well, here's the interesting thing. The angel that gave birth to modern science through a vision in René Descartes doesn't measure in Cartesian logic. So Cartesian rationality excludes the mother of rationality, which in this narrative, in the diary of René Descartes, was an angel. The angel is outside of the system of the gift. So the angel gives Cartesian logic to René Descartes. But the angel, by definition, is outside the set of the gift that she's giving. So she cannot be measured. She gave the gift. The bit that's outside the system cannot be measured, mostly because of the limitations of human consciousness. I mean, it could be measured, it's just we forget it, it's not useful unless we can remember it. And we can't remember complicated systems and work with them in consciousness because we're too dumb. That's the state of human consciousness. Now, a computer can come up with a 260 million model for color. So we can't remember more than 30 colors. A computer can remember 260 million colors. It's not very useful to us because we can't tell the difference with our limited measuring, as much as the computer can. But what's important to understand is that we create systems to feel safe and to be conscious and to know what we're doing. The systems we create are fundamentally flawed, which lead to some degree of unnecessary suffering that is inherent to a flawed system, and that lead to an artificial partitioning of the whole in a way that isn't real, but is necessary for us to have a sense of what's real. In that sense, human suffering is innate to human consciousness at its current level of development, which is a very simple level of development. Because if we were to say to our bodies, for example, oh, this body is too much for me. Well, we kind of do it. We say this is an arm, this is a face, this is a this. We kind of reduce the body to a 7-point system. This is my skin, this is this. But what if we had to deal with the body as 260 billion trillion atoms? Well, it's too much. And so we reduce it down, and we do have a somewhat crude relationship with our bodies, not understanding how it's functioning on the inside, just like we don't understand a lot of consciousness. We don't understand a lot of our own thoughts and feelings, and we don't understand a lot of our inner organs. We're not conscious of them. It's a form of chauvinism, another Frenchman who decided that the yang, that half of reality, was significantly more important than the other half, which is kind of moving in that direction of, if we had a chauvinist designing car wheels, they would decide which is the good half of the wheel and which is the bad half of the wheel. They'd cut it in half, and then they'd throw away or patronize and not maintain and develop one half of the wheel. We'd say we're going to have the super wheel on this side of the wheel, and then this side we just use cheap rubber. It's a girl. It's not all that important. And so your driving experience, even if it was spherical, would be pleasant on one side, bumpy on another. It'd be a miserable ride. We don't do that. We save chauvinism for human hearts, and we create miserable human heart experiences. That is the journey of driving through life with an abused heart. But we make sure that our cars actually are intelligent, meaning we don't apply chauvinism to the wheel. We apply it to social and cult interactions, or racism and all things like that. That's where we're going to divide and create suffering. But we have to protect our cars, which is a certain amount of chauvinism, because it's saying that the intelligence of car design is more important than the intelligence of cultural design and social design, because cars are more masculine because they're on the outside, and felt experience is more feminine because it's on the inside. So there's a chauvinistic, asymmetrical allocation of chauvinism. Chauvinism creates suffering in every area that it's expressed, and so chauvinism is expressed more in feminine domains and less in masculine domains. Now, as we try and live reality as if this energy doesn't exist, and it does exist, its job is to destroy the system, or to gently remind us through anomalous data that doesn't make sense within our system, that the system is a lie. And it does it gently, or in escalating curves, because we cling to the system. We don't care what's real. We want to be able to have a sense that we know what's going on. What's going on? We want an answer that's simple enough that it doesn't terrify us. So one of the things that occurs is you can look at the possibility field in human beings and just, what we could think of everything that's possible. That's the human possibility field. Everything that's possible. Well, we know there have been 10,000 cults in human history. We know there have been billions of people. They're all possible. And then there's trillions more cults and people and societies that are all possible. And everyone is a bit different. Every person is unique. Every cult is unique. Every country is unique. Every landmass is unique. Every fingerprint, there's a lot of uniqueness. And what's interesting is that in the evolution of life and reality, we move through reality. You can think of a wheel turning. And if you think of a wheel turning, you can pick any point on the wheel. And there's a point in the wheel where it's just about to happen, where it's imminent. We're going forward where that would be going forward. And then the life goes forward, and then you can pick a point where it's going backwards. Or it becomes stationary. So if you pick a point on a wheel, whatever that point is, and the wheel is turning. All life is evolving and moving in a cyclical way. Breath is coming in and breath is coming out. Now, at any point on that breath cycle, there's a point where you can say, that's what we're going to build. That's what we're attached to. We're attached to this point. Now, at any point in that process, that's just in the future. That's way in the future. It's just in the past. It's way in the past. And if you get too fixated and stop the wheel from turning and stop your breath because you say, that's what we're about, life stops and dies. Fixation, rigidity to an extreme is the end of life. It stops the breath, you die. Now, what a cult does is it's generally reactive. And so let's say there's a bunch of wars that happen. Well, male bodies in hand-to-hand combat, and if we look, back at World War I and prior wars, a lot of it was hand-to-hand combat. Certainly before guns, it was hand-to-hand. So, and you have in the Arthurian times, whoever won the duel with the sword was considered the superior person, because that was the expression of survival and security and love and belonging, etc. So, at that point where physical brawn and speed and sword play is a means of survival and security and thus love and belonging and self-esteem, you've got some intelligent association with saying that physical prowess is what needs to be developed. It's the pinnacle. So you get fixated on that. And then you see someone happens to be born very big and suddenly they're worshipped in a certain way. Because what's being worshipped is a point on the sphere that seems to facilitate life, growth, evolution. And cults respond. They get fixated on this. Henry Ford invents the assembly line and the automobile, and so there's a fixation, and then mobility opens up in a way that it never exists before. So then you do more of that, and more of that, and more of that, and more of that, because at one point it brought liberation, at one point it brought development and growth. But every single thing that at one point brought development and growth, at another point holds you back. And if you're rigid and fixated, it's the end of life. And so the question is, as life is turning, cults are self-referential and they're attached to themselves. Because a cult is being invented as a heuristic model of reality to protect us from the complexity and fear of the unknown. So if it's trying to do that, if it's protecting us against the complexity and fear of the unknown, then we don't want to let it go, even though it's wrong, even though it's counter to reality. And so a good way to look at a cult is that a cult picks an area of the possibility field that at one point correlates with survival and security. And it develops itself as a very tiny expression of the possibility field. And it starts building upwards, meaning it self-referentially gets stronger and stronger and stronger and builds kind of a pyramid, reaching towards the ultimate expression of its own fixation. Now, what this means as time goes on is that those at the top of the pyramid of the cult dominance hierarchy, because all cults are dominance hierarchies. Because if you don't have a structure that is self-imposing, it goes back into chaos very easily. So there's a structure. And there's a hierarchy within the structure of who does the structure the best. So if you're a capitalist, who makes the most money, that's at the top of the hierarchy. And then if everyone is worshiping capitalism because they worship capital, then they worship the person who has the most capital. If everyone is worshiping physical brawn, then the person who has the most physical brawn, who was the king for so often was who was the last person who couldn't be challenged in a duel. The last person standing was the king in a physical brawn. In the Mowgli story or in different dog and wolf packs, who was the head of the pack, the one that withstood the challenger. So this is saying that physical brawn is what really matters. And in that framework, the person with the most physical brawn will win. But meanwhile, reality is changing. For example, right now, with drones and all kinds of cyber warfare, etc., physical brawn is irrelevant. But there are still people, Mr. Universe, there's still people that are committed to being the top of the old dominance hierarchy. Not because it's intelligent, but because there's something satisfying about the old. It's familiar. It makes me feel comfortable. I don't have to face the chaos of the new. It was good enough for my old dad, and it's good enough for me. So cults become pyramidal and kind of columnar, self-referentially reinforcing themselves. And the longer they go on, the more out of touch they are with a direct correlation of meeting human needs. And the more destructive they become, the more cult-like they become, the more they diverge from reality. Reality is always changing. Now, the human ego is a fractal representation of the cult, statistically speaking. So I say I'm an American man, right? And I'm a good American man because I'm productive, and I'm efficient, and I'm intelligent, and I know mathematics, and I have this paper, and this is my bank account, and this is how I have a bigger house than these people over here. That makes me better than as an American, because I'm in a deification of consumerism. So if I consume more, I must be better than the person who consumes less. I'm a member of capitalism. So if I have more capital, I'm better than the people who have less capital, and I'm less than the people who have more capital. And I believe in modern stuff. So if I have a newer car, I'm better than the people who have an older car. But I also believe in environmentalism. So then the older car, but if it's a new electric car, then I'm better than the people who have an older, they may not be out buying the newest car every year and polluting the environment with endless spending, but they still have a gas car and I have a new Tesla, right? So I'm better than them because electric cars are better for the environment than gas cars, and I'm an environmentalist. Whatever your paradigm, there's a hierarchy. And within the hierarchy, there's the one at the top. The person who has an electric bicycle is even higher than this and this. But then we say, well, you're meaningless because you're not making any money with your electric bicycle. And so we have these different stratas of ranking. And then they go round and round and people climb up. But the ranking system of any cult, particularly if it's ossified or dogmatized, gradually becomes less and less relevant to the underlying currency, which is how well does a cult produce human needs for its people. Per dollar invested, per hour invested, per tree, per acre of land, whatever, how much well-being do the people in the cult feel mentally, emotionally, and physically? Now, you can add in subsets of that, culturally, logistically, spiritually, relationally. You can add any number of subsets of heart, mind, and body into that. But that's the real measure of the intelligence of a cult. How efficiently does it turn energy into the well-being of its people, which breaks down to this subset of hierarchy of needs as a good guide. How many people in your cult are surviving? How many people in your cult are secure in their surviving? How many people in your cult experience high levels of love and belonging, and which parts of them experience which degree of love and belonging? How many people in your cult have high levels of self-esteem? How many people in your cult have developed their unique gifts? How many of people in your cult who have developed gifts have brought them effectively into the environment around them? And then how many of those have reached to be a part of something bigger than themselves, a family, a tribe, a spirituality, an environmental movement, transpersonal meditation? How many people are identifying primarily with an agenda that is bigger than them, that is beyond the self? You have transcendence. So these are the hierarchy of human needs. Now, a cult in which every member of its cult is self-actualized within a rapid time frame by age 30. Let's say a cult that can raise every member of its people from 0 to 30 to be fully self-actualized, to be a rich expression of meeting their human needs. Well, in Denmark, of course, they get to survival at birth and throughout, and then they have much higher levels of meeting human needs. And because there's no fear and terror in the background, they do a better job of developing their unique talents and finding jobs that align with that. They do a better job at talents and then bringing those into the world. And surprisingly, there are more billionaires per capita in Scandinavian countries than there are in the US. So even within capitalism's dominance hierarchy of who's the richest, how many billionaires per 1,000 people, Scandinavian countries, including Denmark, are doing a better job than America, which is all about capital and not about human beings. So it suggests that the model is better. It's a system that's a better system. It's bringing more well-being to more people more consistently. Well, let's say you've got every single person in your cult reaches full self-expression by age 30. It's not too hard. We're just not trying to do it. We're more loyal to capitalism than we are to self-development. So we're not trying to make sure that every person in our cult is fully self-actualized, even though that would create trillions of dollars more wealth than what we have. We're using a self-centered, narcissistic paradigm of sociopathic self-absorption to have everyone try and make as much money as possible, as quickly as possible, in the process creating all kinds of shortcuts that laughably destroy the economy. Laughably destroy the economy. So we don't have a good model for even doing capitalism. And in part, the problem with the capitalistic model is the idea that the capital people make is more valuable than the people who make it. It's not a rational equation. How can you say that the golden egg is more valuable than the golden goose? If you kill the golden goose, there's no more golden eggs. So if the egg is valuable, the goose that makes the egg is more valuable. If you would kill for someone's $1 million a year salary, well, then the person who makes the $1 million a year salary is more valuable than the $1 million they make. But we don't act that way because we don't believe that, because our beliefs are divergent with the underlying mathematics. They're divergent with reality, so we suffer a lot. Anytime you diverge from reality and hold on to a dogmatic model of reality that doesn't work, you suffer more. And that's your teacher. This is not a good way to go. Let's go a different way. And so the next level of intelligence, however, having reached a point where every person in your cult Now, this could be your marriage, your family, your community, your neighborhood, your country, your cult, whatever level you're dealing with. If every member of your cult is self-actualized, beginning with you, has met all your human needs, then the next metric of intelligence is how much energy did it take to do that? Let's say you raise a generation to age 30 that is fully self-actualized, but you consumed half of the natural resources in your country to do so. And the natural resources require 5 generations to replenish. Well, it's an unsustainable model. Another cult that helped all of its people reach self-actualization by age 30, but that achieved that consumed 1/100th of the energy in their cult. Meaning there's still an abundance of time, as there always has been and always will, where everyone gets 24 hours in every day. There's still there's as much money as people want to make. So there's time, there's money, and then there's natural resources. We're consuming, let's say, 1% of our country's natural resources a year in order to bring all of our people to self-actualization by age 30. Where everyone is surviving, everyone is secure in that survival, everyone has love and belonging, everyone has self-esteem, everyone has developed their gifts, everyone's brought them out to the world abundantly and experienced the synergy of that, and everyone is a part of something bigger than themselves. You check all those boxes and you use 1% of your resources. Well, you're 50 times more intelligent than the same cult or a different cult that achieved the same goal, but consumed 50% of their resources. And so, and at certain points of intelligence, there's, if you're consuming 50% per generation in things that take 10 generations to recuperate, by the next generation, you're dead or you've lost that goal. It's not a sustainable goal. If you're dead, it kind of becomes irrelevant whether you're 50 times more intelligent or 1,000 times more intelligent, you're dead. So one of the interesting things that you can extrapolate from ossified cult dynamics is that the higher the rank you have, the more unhealthy and unbalanced you are, the more out of touch with reality. And you have this very interesting tension that emerges in cult systems where the cult rewards you for being stupid. For example, happiness data says that if you do not make $40,000 to $80,000 a year, depending on where you live in the U.S., you're going to be miserable because you're not going to be able to meet your basic survival needs. But if you go from $80,000 a year to $100 million, you don't get 80 times happier. And at some point, there's a place of diminishing returns, but we don't grasp these things. So the cult values us for making more money, which doesn't make us happier. So we get rewarded for being stupid because we're confirming the cult narrative that is stupid. And so there's this sense of being punished for doing the right thing. And what's punishing us is not reality, it's the cult. The ossified cult hierarchy is punishing us for doing the right thing. And rewarding us for doing the wrong thing, which is why there's this tension between, do I do the thing that'll make the most money, or do I do the thing that actually is going to bring me more sustainable well-being or bring the planet more sustainable well-being? And when cults diverge from reality, every ego in the cult has these two voices within them. This is the sane thing to do. This is what I will be rewarded for doing. A cult that ossifies and diverges too much from reality will collapse if it doesn't change and adapt. And the greatest glory of a cult like a Roman Empire is right before the collapse. And as a cult develops self-referentially and excludes exterior data, one of the interesting things is it has to become more and more corrupt. What it's corrupting is reality. its version of reality is diverging from the underlying reality. So, for example, the education system in the United States in the 50s, with the GI Bill, if you got a college degree, you would have a marked higher income than if you didn't. So then the dogma became everyone needs to get a college degree. But first of all, there aren't enough jobs, like McDonald's isn't going to give you more because you have a degree, for example. That's the first thing. The second thing is that's diverged from reality. We're now in a reality where colleges, rather than being free as part of the GI Bill, are costing substantial amounts of money and putting people in debt. At the same time that debt has become unforgivable. At the same time that what colleges are teaching are not what companies really need. At the same time that the data shows that if you have a college degree, it may not be as valuable as not having the debt of a college degree. So you have a divergence from reality, but the dogma of a cult is still everyone should get a college degree. And so you have a corruption of that underlying data in the narrative. So adults are lying to children, and children are experiencing the pain of the corruption, which leads to a rebellion. The dishonored faction in a dysfunctional system rebels to try and destroy the system that is harming it. Everything is part of the whole. If the whole does not honor every part of its constituents, the constituents that are dishonored and suppressed become rebels, and as rebels try to destroy the system. The people who are inside the system and benefiting the system try to keep the system in place because they're afraid of the unknown and the system they view as beneficial. Over time, if the system doesn't change, the rebels destroy the system because it serves less and less people. More and more people become disenfranchised from the system. And so these are tensions and constant focus. And chaos, yin, the feminine, and change are as necessary for life and growth as structure and order. It's the battle between the rebels and the emperor in Star Wars. The real danger is extreme yang or extreme yin, because the extreme polarity is of half of the world is good and half of it is evil, and we're good and everything else is evil. Creates dishonor, violation. It also means an endless amount of war. Because if half of the world is bad and half of it is good, no one's going to win that battle. It's an endless battle. And you're at war with half of yourself and half of the world and half of your values and half of who you are. It's a very violent existence. There are some important solutions to imperfect systems that are worth noting. And there's also kind of a process. So we start off with chaos, unconsciousness, and fear as a general rule. Then we develop an imperfect system, which increases well-being over a terrifying chaos. And then we're attached to our system because it brought us well-being, and so we don't want to mess with it because we're attached to it. So we start suppressing data and challenging any change in the system. Don't change it, it's working. And then the system gradually, as we repress change and new anomalous data, becomes the enemy of the very well-being it once was created to serve. A solution is, number one, to invite and gather data in more and more sophisticated forms and more holographic patterns. Number one is learn from pain. Everywhere we have a line intersecting reality to conform with the system, we have pain. So pain is the teacher of where we're doing the wrong thing. Number three, all people at the top of power structures desperately try and hold on to the power structures because they're addicted to the power out of fear of losing rank. So it's good. Most power structures are good for the top billionaires in capitalism, the top, the principal at school is, maybe benefiting more than the teachers. The people at the top are generally reinforcing the system. The people at the bottom who are not benefited by the system are corrupt, are trying to tear the system apart. And so you need oversight and data to discipline those at the top of systems and rein in the corruption. And the best challenge other than pain is to embrace anomalies. If you embrace anomalies, you will evolve your system before they deteriorate into pain. Embrace change and embrace. Don't teach children that this is the greatest system that's ever been. It's not, first of all. And it gives too much deification to the system. Teach people the truth, which is every single system in the history of all systems is flawed, and that the system is only as valuable as it creates sustainable well-being for its people intelligently, and that it needs to be constantly changed, and teach the metrics for transforming a system rather than the deification of the system. And then finally, decentralize the voice. Not so much that you can't make headway in an important area of whatever system you're doing, but make sure you hear from every voice in the circle. The men and the women, the old and the young, the whites and the blacks, the rich and the poor. If you can decentralize the voices, the system is more likely to include more voices and be good for more voices, which will be a more inclusive, more complex system, which will create more well-being, and a system that uses fear and violence, which is the primary method of most governments to suppress their people.